collected writings, so many ways in which he uses, ways in which we would not be using the word, but so that will be another interesting thing to do. But every time he talks to or writes to somebody, he's saying that, okay, beauty, yes, but it is, he says simplicity should not be sacrificed for the sake of art. So it is to be art and it has to be beautiful, but you can't sacrifice simplicity. And this is the major lesson that, Nandalal learns from Gandhi in a sense. It was not totally alien to Nandalal, because in Shantiniketan too, maybe not for ideological reasons, but for economic reasons, one had to marry aesthetics with frugality. And that is how it was. So it was not very difficult for Nandalal to do this, but it's the brilliance with which he did that. The next Congress was in Haripura in 1938, and there he's called again, and he now says, now you have to decorate and build the whole township, and which he does with local materials. And he does something else. He takes on the responsibility of decorating the entire area with his own paintings. So he does a series of posters or paintings which are called Haripura posters now, which actually it is based on folk styles, but not imitating any one particular folk style, but something that he does, and his mastery as an artist is very much there in the way simplify forms, in the mastery of the lines and so on. But it is the activities of the local people and which they would be able to identify with. So the charge that Nandalal takes upon himself at this point is to do and produce an art that will be addressing both the elites, who are probably more cultivated and are sensitive to the finer points of artistic expression, as well as to the larger rural public. Both of them should be able to equally identify with this. So he is thinking of a new constituency for art. And these are some of the things. Now, in fact, he has this distinction of being very close to both Tagore and Gandhi, and both of them thinking that he is the best artist they could have. So Tagore was actually very effusive and liberal. He wrote a poem in which he describes him. He says, "In imperishable ink you write the name of a country on the canvas of the world. Your brush, O Nanda, enchants the heart of the poet." So this was written when Nandalal was just 35 years old, and he was invited to Shantiniketan first time. So he was very effusive. Gandhi was more reserved, and he wouldn't give the same kind of thing. But one of the students of Nandalal, who later joined him in the Nai Talim program, and asked Gandhi if there is a place for art in his project. So he said, of course there is a place. He gives an interesting example as well. But then he says that I have already told you who is the true artist. Nanda Babu comes very close to my ideal, though perhaps he is not the perfect ideal. So you can see that both these people, in a sense, thinks that however good or bad, he is the guy who really fits the bill, or comes closest to fitting that bill they had. Now, it was actually not Nandalal alone who did this, in a sense, that he also influenced his students. So you have someone like Ramkinkar. The same time, the same year as he was doing the Haripura posters in Shantiniketan, this is done in 1938-39. So just immediately after the Haripura posters, you have Ramkinkar doing the sculpture. Now, why is this so important? The first time the totally marginalized people in India really is not only valorized, monumentalized, iconized, and at that time you can think it probably the way it dominates the landscape. Okay? There is not a single art object in India which really brings the marginal into focus in this manner at that point of time. So he was also, in a sense, responding the Tagorean and Gandhian call but in his own way. So there were many others. And he also later paid his homage to Gandhi, not while he was alive, but after he was shot in 1948. He is supposed to have done this, he started the work the very night he got the news of his being shot. And he did this work, and this is not the Gandhi of the Dundee March, but of Navakali, where you can see him kind of walking on a kind of, killing field and marching through that. So his Gandhi was another side dimension of the Gandhi, different from that of Nandalal. There was also a second person, Binod Bihari, who did something quite interesting a little later, just when India was, before this sculpture, but after Nandalal. Just when India was going to gain its independence, it was being taught. He did this mural between the end of 1946 and the middle of 1947. So it's just the moment when India was getting independence. And this is somewhat, in the previous session, we talked about one of those Nehruvian myths about the history of India. So it's a mural based on the life of the medieval saints. And central to this were these figures. You can see at the bottom there's Ramanuj, then you have Kabir. These are details from the mural. And the center of it, was Tulasi Das. At the middle of a whole, image of the Gangetic kind of landscape. And then on the third wall, you had Surdas and Guru Gobind. So in a sense, he was showing a preference. It was like, what would be the India that we want to see built? And he was looking towards the medieval saints, to the kind of India we want to have, where there would be, heterogeneity, there won't be that oppression of the organized religions, there will be enough of thing. And then what are these three people? In a sense, Tulasi is in the center of the mural, and he represents something like wonder at the whole world of creations. And Kabir comes before him, and he is this person who is open and who is, also at the same time skeptical to things and intellectually oriented. On the third wall, you have this tiny figure almost into a corner of Surdas. So you have these three figures which are quite important, who really is the opposite of, he sits just opposite Kabir, he stands opposite Kabir, and he represents in a sense, intuition. So you have these three things at the center: wonder, intellectual curiosity and skepticism, and intuition, all being celebrated. And the two, they are flanked by the intellectual, like Ramanuj, on the slightly more aggressive, militant Guru Gobind on this thing. So he really is thinking about the kind of India that we need to build, in a sense. So we have this background of Nandalal himself and some of his associates. It is against this background we'll probably have to look at the work he did for the Constitution. Brilliantly decorated, very richly decorated. And some extremely basic points which that it was officially presented on the 25th of November, 49, and it was formally adopted the next day. This is, Ambedkar presenting the Constitution formally to Rajendra Prasad. Then they all signed on the 24th of January 1950. And I put this because if you look carefully in the photograph where you see Nehru signing, it is still not fully decorated. So the decoration came after that. This is the decorated sign page, and when you look at it, we know that the signature, for instance, going across the page, So the decoration actually was done after it was written and signed. Okay. Now the project itself is very interesting. We luckily have a notebook by Nandalal where you see that he's scribbling and thinking about what to include, what not to include, and so on. And he is working. And then you have a typescript thing where he says, okay, who is going to do what, the artist's name is there, and more or less all the thing. And you also have a list of the illustrations at the end where all the things are worked out, okay, and it is printed as part of the Constitution. Now, in the sketchbooks, you can see how they went about it. There were lots of each decorative border was a unique one. It was not the same decorative border which was repeated. So there are pages after pages where you work out these decorative borders. A lot of it is taken from traditional Indian art and improvised. And you can, those of you familiar with Indian art will know that these were kind of available or taken from specific objects. And it might be interesting, but I'm not going to talk about those things. Like here, for one, we can see that how different motifs from different Sanchi things were taken together, and you do a total image. This is of the Vedic Gurukul kind of thing, but how it was made. And also we know that how we went about it from these drawings, the same image, how it grew. There are stages of that. Here are the first 3 stages and the last one. So we know that how they went about it, how he worked on each one of them. And I mean, again, another page from the sketchbook where you see some of the images are being worked in a similar manner. And from this particular one, we know that it is dated 12th November 1951. So we know that, I mean, even about 2 years after it was adopted, the artists were working on it. It took about 3 years for the full completion. And in the end of 51, you are at the stage where you are beginning to have the complete picture, but the painting hasn't taken place. Okay, and that takes place, and we have these pages. And maybe one need to remember that the technique they used was very complicated, and that might have been one of the reasons. This is taken from the printed version, not from the original version, but the special edition which was made, I mean, in 1953. So, but the actual one was all these things that you see in color were gold, and real gold leaves applied according to those designs. So that would be a very slow process, which traditional miniature painters did. And so that would also be the reason why it took a lot of time. And what do we see in the beginning of every chapter? There is an image. And this is the first image, a bull from the Indus Valley. Okay? It has nothing to do with the actual content of the thing. The second one is what you see is a Vedic, Gurukul kind of thing. The third is from the Ramayana, the epic period. Okay. Now, we don't have visual images from that period, so he creates one of his own. The earlier ones, we can definitely see that he took from existing art objects. Next one, again from the Vedic period, is the Mahabharata, which again we don't have images, so he creates one. The next is from what he actually called the Mahajanapatha and Nanda period, which is interesting, the terms that he is using. There are 2, that is one which shows Buddha's life, and the second, Jaina, which is actually taken from a Jain miniature of much later period. Then he goes from there into the Mauryan period, and he have the kind of spread of Buddhism under Ashoka, and it is this, his son and daughter being sent to Sri Lanka. That is the kind of thing. Then he goes on to the Gupta period, and he has 3 images taken from this one from Ajanta. The next one, he has Vikramaditya watching a play, Kalidasa's Shakuntala. and then the Nalanda University, where you have monks from different places. Now, this one, of course, was done at the bottom rather than the top. The medieval period, again, you can see that's the next. So you have this historical periodization that he's thinking about, and it's done in this order. And then he takes this from the Konarak sculpture, then the Nadaraja comes as the thing, and the third is the Pallava relief, which he remodels at Mahabalipuram. So that takes into the medieval period, and then he moves into the Muslim period. And these are terminologies I've just taken from his kind of things. And it is a portrait of Akbar with Mughal architecture. Now, here there were two things. Whom would represent the Muslim period? Akbar or someone else? You can see in the sketchbook, it is written Shah Jahan. Okay? So he was playing around with, and if you look at the rough draft, he had portraits of both Akbar and Shah Jahan with Mughal architecture. So you finally see that in the final process it becomes Akbar and Mughal architecture. And the next is the British period. When he comes to, he does portraits of Shivaji and Guru Gobind, that is one, and the next he does portraits of Tipu Sultan and Lakshmi Bai. And this he calls Rise Against the British Conquest. Now again, if you go to the draft, we can see that he's making these differences. Initially he had thought about 3 portraits in each category: Rana Pratap, Shivaji, Guru Gobind. Rana Pratap is left out. And the next one, it is the portraits of Tipu Sultan, Lakshmi Bai, and Ranjit Singh. Ranjit Singh is left out. So, which could be, an aesthetic decision. How many portraits can you include in that space and make the image still impressive? Then he moves into the period of India's freedom struggle, and he brings back his own image of the Dandi March there. And the next image he has representing the freedom struggle is Gandhi at Navakali. So once again, those 2 references that these artists used are brought back. And there is a third where he says it's a revolutionary moment for freedom. And you have Subhash Bose, but there is this little quotation of Subhash Bose, part of a radio kind of program he did, where he appeals to Gandhi in a sense. So even the revolutionaries they acknowledged, but they also seem to be bringing back the centrality of Gandhi to the freedom. So this ends the final historical periodization for him. After that, he ends with 3 images. One image is that of the mountains. Next image is that of the deserts. The third image is that of the sea. So in a sense, bringing these natural elements at the end of the thing, the land, the mountains, the deserts, the sea, in a sense, is an acknowledgement or way of invoking Tagore, who is absent from his whole thing. If you remember, that is one of the central elements in many of his poetry, including the one we have taken as a national anthem. The land is prominent. In the one the Bangladeshis adopted, the land is even more central to that. So I think that was a kind of homage to Tagore indirectly. And here again he thinks, what all the motives you could have for the thing. The one at the top actually is taken from the Indus. At the bottom he was thinking 2, and finally he goes for an image from a Borobudur sculpture. Not from an Indian source at all. And if you look at the notes, there is something interesting. There is more reference to trade as well. Now, in the final list of topics, the trade element is left out, but it's also a way of connecting India with the world, in some sense, trade as a thing. So these images are not illustration in any sense of the Constitution, but they are illuminations, you can call them embellishments in one sense, or you can take them as a parallel text. I mean, he is inscribing India's history in some sense into the Constitution and providing it like a foundation on which the Constitution rests in some sense. So that, I mean, imaginary history, let it be, but he is definitely invoking that. Now, it may not be free of the artist's preferences and the biases of his time, but certainly what we see is a pluralistic image of India's past. I mean, broad enough to accommodate various kinds of elements within that history and make that the foundation on which the Constitution rests. The last page, of course, is an acknowledgement of all the people who kind of thing, which is a nice gesture in a sense. I mean, in the way that, I mean, such an important document, I mean, it acknowledges the individuals, the person who wrote it, the person who illuminated it, including the press that printed it, all in that kind of a thing. Now, which is something we don't see today, and it was in last final point in the national struggle in a sense, and the culmination of a personal project for Nandalal Bose, which began with the Swadeshi, ends with Indian independence, and probably the document for its future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any comments, observations to share?
It's okay. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for this wonderful and very insightful reading.